Welcome to Fake Love and Flying Monkeys, the podcast where fake love is exposed. I'm Nova Gibson and I am your host. I'm the principal counsellor at Brighter Outlook Narcissistic Abuse Counselling.com.au. This space is dedicated to helping you reclaim your worth and understand the impact of toxic relationships with suspected narcissists. You deserve clarity, healing, and freedom from the pain of fake love and flying monkeys. So please leave a review and grab a copy of my book, Fake Love, Understanding and Healing from Narcissistic Abuse. Let's uncover the truth and take back your power. Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Fake Love and Flying Monkeys. In this episode, we are going to be taking a deep dive into the difference between trauma bonding and codependency as it relates to a relationship with a narcissist. Now, the reason I wanted to do this episode was because so many of my beautiful clients who come to see me in my counseling practice, by the way, guys, if you would like to have a one-on-one Zoom counseling session with me, please just see my website link in the description. But so many of you guys struggle with the notion that the reason you can't leave, or if you do manage to leave, bearing in mind that you never actually leave a toxic relationship with a narcissist, you escape. So let me rephrase that. If they are able to escape from their abusive relationship, they struggle with the notion that it was their fault. There's something wrong with them. And of course, their abuser, the narcissist, has conditioned them to believe that everything was their fault and there is something genuinely wrong with them. And they bring up the word that has been brought to their attention or that they have read about, which is codependency. And when this concept is raised with the victim of narcissistic abuse, it supports what their abuser told them, which means there is something wrong with them. So for me, calling a victim of narcissistic abuse codependent and reinforcing that that's the reason they stay with their abuser and they find it difficult to stay away if they've managed to escape, that's victim blaming. But before I go any further, I just want to make it clear that I am not saying that there are never any issues of codependency that perhaps exist within these toxic relationships. I am simply saying that they are never the defining factor that keeps a victim trapped in that toxic cycle of abuse. Codependency can certainly have a bearing in these relationships, particularly if you are the victim of childhood abuse, childhood trauma, where your caregiver, the person you were supposed to take for granted, would love you through thick and thin. And instead, you were taught to believe that love, in inverted commas, was transactional and it was conditional. There were strings attached to it only if you met their needs. A child of abuse is conditioned to believe that there is something wrong with them if they're left alone, if they're rejected, if they're abandoned, and that they're alone because no one else wants to be with them because of their flaws. The unhealed wounds from these past traumatic relationships will certainly make it more likely that you will find yourself in the proximity of another relationship where that person mirrors your abusive parent or a past abusive partner, because that relationship is familiar. It may be that those brutal words from a toxic parent or a past abuser ring inside your head, and you find yourself scrambling to find a relationship as soon as one toxic relationship ends, because you've been conditioned to believe that you are only worthy if someone wants to be with you. If you're single, if you're alone, then you truly are getting what you deserve. And the pain of having that inside your head, of believing that you're not worthy, is unbearable. And victims find themselves dependent on another person to make them feel better, rather than having that other person come into their life to complement their already beautiful life. And so because of past trauma, because of the emotional abuse, psychological abuse that victims have experienced, they find themselves dependent on another person, on a relationship to make them feel better, rather than being taught to give that to themselves. And of course, that's what abusers do. They make you feel worthless and that you are nothing without them. And if they reject you, if they give you the silent treatment, it's because there is something wrong with you. So what exactly is codependency? Codependency is a relationship dynamic. And as I said earlier, it often stems from childhood trauma, where one person will rely on another individual, on being in a relationship to feel worthy. That relationship is where they get their self-worth and their identity. And it's a need to have another person fix whatever is lacking in them. They turn to someone else to help them feel better. Now, codependency is not just about needing someone in your life to fix what is going wrong for you. It can also be about you needing to fix others. Your self-worth, your identity is wrapped up in fixing other people's problems. And to be alone with no one to fix, you just feel empty. Whether it's an overwhelming need to just have someone there to prop you up when you feel the need, or an overwhelming need to fix and help others at the expense of any needs of your own, the bottom line is that you need this relationship to make you feel whole. Without it, you feel worthless. Your self-worth, your identity is wrapped up in being in an official relationship with someone else. Now, I think the biggest difference between codependency and trauma bonding, which I'm going to explain very soon, is that codependency can exist outside of a toxic or an abusive relationship, because that codependent person may stay in that unhealthy environment, in those toxic relationships, because of that ingrained need to please others. And it's not actually a psychological response to someone controlling you. Here's a quick example to explain codependency, which is not related to coercive control or trauma bonding. I'll use the character of Sophie. Sophie is the person I describe in my book, Fake Love, Understanding and Healing from Narcissistic Abuse. So Sophie grew up in a household where her mother was a narcissist. And of course, she suffered emotional abuse. Her needs were never important. And she was taught that love and control, love and abuse are the same thing. As she grew up, she walked on eggshells all the time because she was always trying to work out what would please her mother. And of course, one day, what she did would be the right thing, and the next day, exactly the same behavior would be the wrong thing. So she was forever trying to please her mother. Virtually from the moment she left the womb, as is always the case with children of narcissists, she was conditioned to forever try to please a parent who could not be pleased. So that was her life. That was what life was all about. It was trying to work out what someone else wanted and trying to make that happen for that person. And every time she fell down and failed, which is of course the goal of a narcissistic parent, she would get right back up and try again to please that narcissistic mother. So when Sophie got older and she found herself in her own relationships, she was drawn to men who mirrored her mother. She was drawn to these relationships that were familiar, and she was also fearful of not being in a relationship because she felt so empty when she wasn't trying to please someone. So as it turned out, Sophie did find herself with another narcissistic abuser, a person that mirrored the relationship she had with her toxic mother. But what drove her to the relationship was a need to feel validated, to feel worthwhile, because she had been taught that she was unlovable. And being in a relationship, toxic or not, negated those feelings of feeling unlovable. Someone wanted to be with her. But once the love bombing stage had come to a screeching halt and the devaluation stage had begun, what kept Sophie in that relationship? She can be codependent on a relationship where she's not being abused. So what kept her in that relationship when the abuse became impossible to ignore? She knew it was toxic on a logical level, but she just couldn't leave. The concept that kept Sophie trapped in that abusive cycle was a concept that we call trauma bonding. So what is trauma bonding? Trauma bonding is a very powerful attachment, or an addiction, as I like to call it, to your abuser, or more like the roller coaster of emotions and experiences that you have when you're in these toxic relationships. The highs are polarized from the lows. The lows are incredibly low, and whilst the highs might genuinely be very high in the beginning in terms of the love bombing stage, in the end, or once that love bombing stage is over, the highs are just perceived. They appear to be high. They appear to be good times, not because they are, but because the lows are so incredibly low. In other words, those breadcrumbs of when they're being nice to you, which can simply be days they're not abusing you, in the end, they appear so valuable. They appear like gold because there is such a stark contrast between those good days and the rock bottom lows. So the narcissist love bombs you. They get you hooked on that feeling. It feels good. And then the abuse starts. But you're isolated. You're confused. You've become dependent on this person for what your reality is, because they've gaslighted you for so long that you don't trust yourself. So you turn to them for what you're really hearing or what you're seeing or what you're feeling. They become the dictator of what is real for you. So you have this wound, and who do you turn to heal that wound? The very person who created the wound in the first place. And it is this cycle of dependency on those breadcrumbs of the nice treatment that sets you up for a very, very powerful trauma bond. And the trauma bond is made even more powerful because of the chemical changes that take place in your body. So there's an actual physical, biochemical dependence on this cycle of abuse, where in the beginning, when they're love bombing you, the dopamine's flowing, all your dopamine receptors are being hit at once, the oxytocin's flowing, it feels good, but that feeling is soon ripped away from you and you come crashing down, and those amazing chemicals, those ones that make you feel good, they're replaced by ones that make you feel horrible, where the cortisol levels are on overdrive. The adrenaline is pumping 24/7 as you constantly walk on eggshells, and you are forever chasing that good feeling again. You want those happy hormones flowing again. Now, other factors that come into play to strengthen this addiction, this powerful, irrational attachment to your abuser, are concepts such as intermittent reinforcement. This is the same concept that comes into play when you're on a poker machine or a slot machine. You will hang in there for long periods of time, putting all your money into that machine in the hopes of an eventual payoff. And because you stuck around, you put so much money in there, that eventual payoff feels amazing. But if you knew when you were going to get a payoff, where would the fun be? Where would the money be for the casino if you were expecting a payout every second or 10th or 20th hit on that machine? There would be no elation in that payoff because you are expecting it. You know when it's coming. It becomes all the more tantalizing when you don't know when you are going to be rewarded. And this is exactly how the narcissist keeps you hooked. They know that when they're eventually nice to you, the feelings of relief that the abuse has ended will outweigh any need for accountability, and they can continue to abuse you. In other words, they will make the reward of their time or them being nice to you again unpredictable, so that you will hang in there for a long period of time, tolerating everything they put you through because of the feelings of relief you will experience when the abuse eventually ends. Another concept that strengthens that trauma bond is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive meaning when we think, the acquisition of information, and dissonance meaning conflict. There's a conflict with the information that you're receiving and what you believe or want to be true. And when you, as the victim, are experiencing cognitive dissonance, it feels bad. And your brain, to protect you, wants to get your body, your mind back to a state of equilibrium. So to do that, it gets rid of the thought that feels bad. In other words, the thought that this person whom you love and you believe loves you is treating you terribly. They're abusing you. But to get rid of that thought, you need to make the abuse not as bad as it is. So victims will come up with all of these rationalizations. These are survival techniques. An example might be, yes, they yelled at me last night, but you know what? I really did burn the dinner, so it was pretty justified that they yelled at me. And you know what? They come home late from work. So what? I've got a beautiful roof over my head. Can you see what's going on here? The victim, to be able to survive, is minimizing the abuse, and in doing so is actually owning why that person abused them in the first place. So cognitive dissonance and intermittent reinforcement are two very, very important factors that go hand in hand with trauma bonding, where the victim is constantly struggling to reconcile this person who hurts them all the time with the person who every now and then shows them love or kindness. So here's an example to explain trauma bonding. Once again, Sophie meets Justin, and in the beginning, he is so charming. He's nice. He comes on thick and strong, and she feels amazing. It feels good when he is being so nice to her. But as the relationship goes on, he starts to criticize her all the time. He hates her friends. He hates her family. He puts her down all the time. And every time she tries to leave, when she finally works up the courage to do that, he pulls out the nice card, and those horrible feelings associated with the constant criticism, they're gone, and she's got back that person she met in the beginning, and the relief that she feels that he's finally being nice to her outweighs all of that abusive stuff, because the good feelings, even if they're only breadcrumbs, are just so potent, because even if just for a very brief moment, they feel better. Sophie felt better when he was nice to her. And those breadcrumbs were all she could think about, not because they were amazing, but because the horrible, abusive times came to an end. So looking at trauma bonding in terms of an addiction, which it is no different to any other addiction. Let's say it's heroin, and the heroin user knows this drug is just absolutely destroying their life. On a logical level, they know that, but the withdrawal symptoms, the cold turkey, the thought of being in withdrawal, they are just so overwhelming that they come up with all of these reasons to keep the drug in their life. This is the addicted brain saying things like, oh, everyone's got their vice. Look, I'm spending money on heroin, but you know what? I got all my bills paid this week, and some people drink alcohol. It's not as bad as it could be. So when you're ruminating about your abuser, it is no different to a heroin addict ruminating about heroin all the time when they're thinking about going cold turkey, or they are in withdrawal. That's all they think about. And it's confusing when it's a person and logically you know that they're abusing you, but the principle is the same. Now, victims mistakenly think that, number one, their abuser was right because they can't stop thinking about their abuser, and that there's something wrong with them. And they think that they must love this person because why would they be thinking about them all the time? And they reason that being without that abuser is worse than being with them and tolerating, suffering the abuse that is inflicted upon them. But those ruminations, the fact that you think about them all the time, the fact that you cling on to those breadcrumbs of nice treatment and dismiss all of the really horrible stuff, that's not love, because love feels good. And it's not that it feels good to be with this person, it's that it feels so bad to be without them. And that's not love, that's addiction. And that is withdrawal that you're feeling. It's not you missing this person that you love. So whilst previous trauma and those unhealed wounds will make it more likely that you will find yourself in the proximity of a narcissist, trauma bonding and becoming addicted to this cycle of abuse can happen to anyone. So telling a victim that they stay with their abuser, they keep going back to their abuser because they're codependent, is reinforcing what their abuser told them. There's something wrong with them, and it resonates, it screams of victim blaming. And what also happens when we make codependency the defining factor in an abusive relationship is that it shifts the blame onto the victim when it should lie solely on the shoulders of the abuser. The reality is that anyone can become a victim of a narcissist and be the victim of that very powerful trauma bond, because it does not have anything to do with a lack of intelligence or weakness, but rather the strategies that the narcissist uses that are not visible. You don't know this is happening to you. You don't know that you're becoming addicted to this cycle until it's too late and you're enmeshed and dependent on this person. And just to be clear, trauma bonding is not this mutual thing that's going on between two people. It's about psychological manipulation and abuse. So the word bond, I think, is a bit of a misnomer, because this is not a healthy bond between two people. This is an attachment, an addiction by one person that comes about because of that psychological manipulation, those abusive strategies with those polarized highs and lows that the narcissist engages in. So that's a brief explanation, guys, of the difference between codependency and trauma bonding. But I go into more detail about this in my book, Fake Love, Understanding and Healing from Narcissistic Abuse. So please get your copy. It's also available in Audible and Kindle. But it's just so dangerous to label victims with being codependent and to completely ignore the concept of trauma bonding when it relates to domestic violence and narcissistic abuse, coercive control. Mislabeling victims can keep them stuck in that cycle of shame and guilt, and without the proper support. If you're getting therapy, if you're talking to someone, it doesn't matter how compassionate they are and how good they are at their job, if they're not addressing the underlying reason that you feel unable to leave your abuser. And if we're just concentrating on what is wrong with the victim, we are telling them the same thing that they've been told over and over again by their abuser, which is that they are the problem. If only you weren't codependent, this would never have happened to you. When we're telling victims that they need to fix themselves to stop being abused, we're kind of telling them that they enabled the abuse. And that's the last thing they need to be told. They need support and they need validation for their trauma. So if you have been the victim, you now realize, of trauma bonding, or you're still trauma bonded to the narcissist, please realize that there is support out there, but you have to understand why you stay and why you kept going back, and that it wasn't because there was anything wrong with you. Victims need understanding, not judgment. And the devastating effects of narcissistic abuse, coercive control, only go to strengthen that powerful, illogical trauma bond. And when I say illogical, it flies in the face of logic to outsiders, but more so to the victim. They feel even crazier because they are craving something they know is bad for them. So just to finish, guys, I really want to make it clear, if I haven't already, that staying with your abuser or going back again and again was not because there was something wrong with you. Conflating codependency with trauma bonding is victim blaming. It suggested that you were the problem for not leaving. And this is really harmful because it overlooks your abuser's responsibility. So please get lots of support, because in order to break the powerful trauma bond, which is totally possible, you need the right support with a trauma-informed therapist, someone who gets narcissistic abuse. And you need to understand what happened to you so that you can break the conditioned responses and basically sever the ties with your abuser and take those chains off, those handcuffs, which keep you trapped in a cycle of abuse that you do not deserve. And that brings us to the end of another Fake Love and Flying Monkeys episode. I hope that I explained that clearly. It's very difficult to really encapsulate just how powerful the trauma bond is, and also the danger in labeling you as the victim for being codependent, and that being the reason that you stayed in the abusive environment. So I hope you now know that it wasn't your fault and that trauma bonding is extremely powerful and you need lots of support to break it. To read more about trauma bonding and also to have some concrete strategies to break that trauma bond, escape your abuser and heal, please don't forget to get your copy of my best-selling book, Fake Love. The link to order it is in the description. Now, if you would like to support this channel, guys, please just leave a rating and a review. And of course, there's a link there where you can buy me a cup of coffee. I love coffee. On that note, guys, it's bye from me for now. Until the next episode, please remember, you are worthy of love and you are worthy of so much more than a lifetime of fake love and flying monkeys.